lots of things that are going to be possible only with a good camera. So he's going to talk about what you need to do these kind of things, and more importantly, when you would use these kind of techniques. So advanced techniques coming 2 weeks from now, and we will end the series, back again, starting where we started from with Sam, talking more about the creative aspects of photography. So we are going to be talking about composition, perspective. We are going to be talking about, what you see when you compose a picture and so on. So more the creative, the art of like, what do you want this picture to, what story you want the picture to say, and so on. So we're going to be, Sam is going to be talking about that. That's going to be, a beautiful session. Looking forward to both these sessions, the advanced techniques as well as the creative aspects of photography. But you guys are here today, and here we will start on the basic premise of this whole session, right? So we said that we want you guys to understand the capabilities of your camera or your smartphone, right? Most always you would leave that in auto mode. You just click, and maybe you'll be happy with the results. But what we want you to understand is that what are the different modes and what they give you, right? And we've gone through a very techno scientific background in the last 5 sessions. We've talked about sensors, we have talked about lenses, we have talked about the exposure triangle, and then covered in depth things like ISO, shutter priority, and aperture priority. Now we are going to be talking in this session. We will ask you to move away from auto, right? And we will say, what are you going to get when you move away from auto, right? So that is what we will do. And without further ado, let us get started. Okay, so here is you guys all see the presentation, and let's start with, I will skip. Nowadays, in most modern cameras, there is a creative auto kind of mode. So there is a full auto, usually signified by some kind of a green rectangle or something like that. And then there is a creative auto, which kind of opens up a little bit of the controls that you can for the user to control. But let's go jump into the main, one of these creative modes. These are all in the mode dial. These are all called, let me just show you my camera that I have at the moment so that you can see what I'm talking about. Right, I'll stop the sharing with just a second while I'll show you the camera that I have. Today, I'm not working with my regular camera, but this is the old camera. You don't want to see my face. What you really want to see is the other thing, right? So here you can see that this is the mode dial, right? I'll try to see if I can zoom in. Okay, so here you can see the mode dial, and it has different aspects to it, right? So the green rectangle is the auto mode, and then after that is what I would call, 1 second, I'll try to zoom in. I'll see. Okay. Okay. Now it's better. Okay. So what you can see is that there is a creative auto, which is the CA. It is going to be different in Nikon and Sony, but they will also have something like this. But we are going to be jumping, and we are going to be talking about the P, which is the program mode, and we are going to be talking about the TV, which is the shutter priority mode, and the AV, which is the aperture priority mode today, right? So we are going to be covering these three, and then Praveen is going to cover in the next session. He's going to be covering the M, which is the full manual, and he's going to be covering the B, which is the
Sir,
bulb mode.
can you share your screen, please, sir?
I'm sorry, it's not being shared, is it? Give me, sir, just a minute.
iPhone.
Yes, yes. I thought but give me just a minute. So this is probably going to be a better version of this. Can you guys see it better now? The screen.
No, we see your face on a block and then your phone on another block. In that
Another
phone, we
block.
can see
Okay.
a little
Not
bit. Yeah,
not 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 the screen, is it? Give me just a
not
minute. I'm
not the
sorry.
screen.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to share it again. Okay. Now you guys can see the screen. Even I can see the screen. Okay. Okay. Now I have to figure out how to get back into the other mode, which will show the screen itself. I'm sorry. I'll what I'll do is I'll stop the sharing here, and I will just pin. Okay, is this better?
Yes.
Okay, okay, very good. So what you can see is that there is a green rectangle, which is the full auto mode. This is Canon. And then there is something called Creative Auto, which is CA. And then today we will be covering the P, TV, and the AV. And the next session, Praveen will cover the M, which is the manual, and the bulb. And these are the other ones, C1, C2, C3 are just custom modes which you can customize as to like exactly what you need in the and save it there so that you can easily access that without changing the settings. Okay, so I will stop this. I'll remove the spotlight and the um, go back to the original screen from the laptop. Okay, so what do you get when you go to the program mode, right? So what you get is that you in the fully auto mode, what happens is that the camera decides the exposure, which means that it decides the three components of the exposure, which is the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter, right? But when you go to the program mode, you get back control of all these things. Mainly, you get the control of ISO. I don't use it too much for ISO. I use when I'm in program mode, I usually use it for the second and the third things, which is I can control the focus point. So I will, like let's say if the camera, when it looks at a particular thing on the screen, it decides that there is a particular thing worthy of focusing, it will focus. But let's say that I don't want that to be the focus, I want something else. This is the way I can actually control the focus. Now, this is easily done in a smartphone by looking at the screen and then touching, the point where you want to focus. So this is something similar you can do both in the SLR in the digital cameras nowadays. You can touch the screen, or I'll show you another way of choosing a focus point in using the camera that I have today. And then the third thing is also something that I usually do, which is I will sometimes want to compensate the exposure that the camera has thought is a good exposure. Sometimes I might want to increase the exposure, so that is make everything brighter, or sometimes I might want to decrease the exposure by making everything darker. Now, why is this usually done? Because when the camera is evaluating, remember we talked about metering last time, right? So when the camera is evaluating what it sees, it thinks that, okay, this is the kind of exposure I need for the amount of light information that I'm getting. But sometimes what happens is that, let's say there is something really bright and the camera is compensating for that. If because it's really bright, the camera has automatically gone into a very dark kind of exposure, and the person that you are photographing in the front is very dark. So in those cases, what you should do is you increase the exposure so that you're correctly exposing for the person that you are going to photograph, and you don't care too much about the bright background, and you might end up losing some of the detail, because what is important to you at the moment is to correctly expose the person that you're focusing on. Now, this can be accomplished in a couple of ways, right? So when you have focus point put on that particular person, the camera will usually do a good job. It will say that there are lots of bright things in the back, but I am focusing on this guy, and this guy is slightly dark, and therefore I need to increase the exposure. But sometimes it might not do a good job, and that is why we are moving away from auto, right? So the camera is not always going to do the best job, and you know the photograph that you want, and these are the tools with which you can control the camera to get the photograph that you want. Okay, so today we will show you. So these are, and the other thing is the white balance and the metering we talked about in the last session. But I will focus more on the ISO focus point and exposure compensation through actual demonstration with my camera. Okay, so give me just a minute. I will share my entire screen because I have okay. So you guys can see my screen, and you can see that I am in the P mode, right? So which is the program mode. It's denoted by P. And currently I have set the ISO to auto. Okay, so that is the current state of the camera. You can also see that the exposure compensation is 0, which means that I'm not increasing or decreasing exposure. And then you can also see that, given that this is my old camera, I have a grand total of 9 focus points, including the center, right? So right now, I had pre-focused it on that photograph that you see in the back. That's why you see that the photograph is actually visible quite a bit, and the object here, the tripod that is sitting here, is kind of blurred. Okay, so what we will do first do is change the ISO, right? So I will say I want to control the ISO, and I want the ISO to be 200. Okay. Now the auto ISO has figured out some good ISO for this particular scene, but I'll say that I want to override that, and I want to control the ISO. Now, if I move the cursor to that shutter button that you see, it is saying that I need 1/15th of a second of an exposure. Okay. Because I'm asking for an ISO of 200. Now, you know that, let's say, I'm holding this heavy camera in my hand, and that is why, you can see that it is shaking a little bit, right? You know that 1/15th of a second is actually fairly slow. You start to need things like tripods and all that. Now, I want, let's say, a higher exposure so that it doesn't have any shakes, right? So what do I do? Usually, you need to, obviously, if I were in a different mode, I would just go to the TV mode, and I would increase the shutter, I would decrease the shutter speed so that it is faster. But now we are in P mode. one thing that we can do is we can dial up the ISO to a little more, right? Now, this camera, because it's an old camera, its maximum ISO is 3200. So when I go to an ISO of 1600, it is already pushing the limits of what is good in this camera. 1600 is good, but by the time you get to 3200, you will see a lot of noise. But now you see the exposure that it is calculating, right? It has gone from the 2.8 1 by 15, it has gone to 1/50th and 3.5, which means that it is a faster shutter speed and it has got a slightly lower aperture because I've increased the ISO. Let's take a picture. So that is the kind of picture that I get, right? So you can see the picture. Now I go back and let's say I make that ISO go down to 200 again. Okay. Now you see that the shutter speed is 1/10th, and it is needing to open the lens at its widest. This particular zoom lens, the widest aperture that it can support is 2.8. So it needs to open up as much as possible in this particular lens in order to shoot this at a shutter speed of 1/15. Okay, so let us take another picture. Okay, now you see that. So the exposures are similar, right? So you see that the exposure previously and this particular exposure is good because it is calculated for the particular ISO that I want. The other two parameters have been varied so that it still gets a similar kind of exposure, right? So even if I went to an ISO of 1600, it adjusted the shutter speed and the aperture in order to get a similar looking exposure like you see in this particular case. So that is what one can do in if I wanted to actually do change the ISO. Now I am going back to ISO of auto because as I said, the thing that I really want to do in this kind of a mode is to control the focus point and also the exposure compensation, right? So now you see that, as I said, it is that particular picture that is in focus. So now I'm going to say that I want this tripod to be in focus, right? So this is again, I'll touch this focus point and I'll say, okay, go and make that tripod in focus. Now you'll see that there is a little red rectangle on the tripod, and you can see that the tripod has come back into focus and that picture is gone out of focus, right? So this is the way one can actually choose what particular portion of the image you want to be on focus and what not. So if this camera automatically chose something else to be in focus, but you really want something in particular to be in focus, now you've done this. So now I can take a picture. ISO is 250, right? I take a picture, and then you see that the tripod is in focus, and then the photo is not in focus. Now let's say I want to go back and then switch it back to that photo, right? So now I have that little thing, that rectangle on the photo. I click that, and then I say I want to select that. Now you see that the photo is in focus and the tripod is not. Okay, so I take a picture. Now you see that the tripod is slightly blurred and then the photo is in perfect focus, right? So this is what you can do in changing the focus mode. Now, the other thing that I said is exposure compensation, right? So let's say that this particular tripod that okay, now let's again put the focus back on the tripod, right? I am clicking that and then I say the focus is back on the tripod. Now the tripod is bright. Now this people in the back, let's say there are some people in the back that are too dull right now because this is bright. So what I can do is I can exposure compensate for that by saying that, okay, I want to make the picture brighter, right? So now I have made the picture brighter, and you can see that everything in the whole picture has become brighter, right? So I can take a picture, and then you can see that it has gone to 1/40th of a second, ISO 1600, and f2.8 because I have increased the ISO exposure. So now this is a picture where you can see that everything is bright, and even the things that were kind of dark in the in that corner is bright, right? Because I wanted it to be brighter. So I have increased the exposure to make it brighter. Now let me go back to regular exposure, right? So now what did we get when we did this? It is ISO 1600, 1/30, and 2.8, right? So now let me go back and say that what if it is normal exposure? Now you can see that the picture there has become a little dark. And now you can see what has happened to the ISO. The ISO has gone back down to 500, right? It has gone back to 500 because it doesn't need that much brightness. So remember, increasing your ISO increases the sensitivity of the camera, therefore makes everything brighter. That's exactly what happened, right? So now I'm going back to let me take another extreme. Let's say I want a -1, right? Now the camera is saying that, look, I don't want an ISO of 400 or 600, 500. I am okay with an ISO of 100 itself because this guy he wants an underexposed, like a dark kind of picture, right? So now let's look at what kind of a picture I get. You see that everything is dark because I purposely underexposed something. Now, this could be because there is a particular, thing that is really bright in the background and that is killing my photo. So I underexposed it and I made the photo look like the way I want. So this is what you get by doing things like in the, program mode. You can do this. And then, of course, I said that you can also do picture styles, you can do white balance, right? So I can do white balance of, let's say, daylight. Now you can see that the picture is turned to be, the live view has turned out to be a little yellowish in color. Yeah, let me see, go back to auto. Right now, this is actually quite this is what I see in my eyes. So it's this color. Now when I'm overriding what the camera is saying and then say that I want you to use the daylight white balance, then you can see that it has gone a little warmer, right? If I want to go to shade, which means that it will become a little cooler, right? So you can see that it has gone to a little different. Now you see that this has become a very cool kind of image where there's a lot of bluish kind of tinge. So these are the different white balance things that is being seen. Now, this particular room is actually lit by fluorescent lights, right? So, therefore, when I chose fluorescent, it is actually showing a good exposure because it is right now lit by fluorescent. And this auto white balance was able to pick it up that it is kind of fluorescent light, and therefore, this is how I should expose. So, this is a way that I could, override the white balance of what I'm getting by choosing a particular white balance if the auto white balance is not working. Okay, so now let us go to the next mode, right? So let us go to the TV mode. Okay, now I've got the TV mode. Okay, give me just a minute. I will, I'll tell you about the TV mode in the PowerPoint. Just a minute. right? So the TV mode allows you to set a particular shutter speed. Then camera adjusts the other two aspects of the the exposure triangle, the aperture and the ISO to get the right exposure. Now, what are the applications of the TV mode? It is usually in freezing motion or showing moving objects, very smoothly, right? And in typical Indian houses, what is a moving object that you usually find in rooms? It is a ceiling fan. So I will show you an example using the ceiling fan that I have in this room right now. Okay. Again, I will go to escape of the PowerPoint. Okay. Now you can see that we have the ceiling fan. Okay, now again, I'll focus on the center button, center thing, right? Okay, it is focused. Now you see that it is at a 1 over 640th of a second. That is quite a fast exposure, right? So let us take a picture of this.
Sorry, we can't see the screen.
Oh, you can't see it? I'm sorry. Give me just a minute. Okay, can you see it now? Can you see the fan?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, very good. So it is 1/640th of a second, and let me take a picture. You see that the 1/640th of a second has completely stopped the motion of the fan. The fan looks like it is stationary, right? This is the application of the shutter speed. If the shutter speed is high enough, you can stop motion of these kind of things. This is especially useful in photographing dance or waterfall or fountains or these kind of things where there is motion and you want to stop the motion. So and sports, obviously, right? So you can see that completely it is stopped. Let us go to the other extreme, right? So let us say that I want to go to a really small 1 over 15th of a second. Okay. Now you can see, I'll just move my picture, mouse over that shutter button. You can see that it is tried to do 4.0 aperture, ISO of 100, 1 over 15, which means that it is actually having a lot of light, right? So it is actually trying to compensate by, having the exposure down, aperture lower and the ISO low, right? So it has enough. So now I'll take a picture. You see that the fan, you can't see the blades at all. So this is an example of a picture shot at a low shutter speed. So the camera's shutter actually opened for a fairly long time, and therefore the fan actually physically moved during the time that the shutter was open, and therefore it was not able to capture any of the blades, and you will see a nice smooth picture of nothing basically of or the blades are kind of empty. Now this can also be used creatively to show motion, right? So what we can do is that again, I'll stop sharing just for a minute and I'll talk a little bit about this. So what we can do with this particular thing is that I can ensure that the thing that I am trying to focus is people can understand that there is movement, right? So sometimes by using a slow shutter speed, you see this in these cartoons, right, where you have, let's say, that Wile E. Coyote, right? And you'll see that the cartoonist, right, purposely makes the legs of that coyote, not be seen, right? So it is kind of like there is a circle kind of a thing, which kind of tells you that okay, the coyote is running, right? Now that is what can be done creatively by using a slow shutter speed in the camera. Now let's say on the other hand, let's say I'm at the Olympics. I have Usain Bolt running 100 meters, and I want to freeze him. Right? Then you have to go to a high shutter speed, like let's say 1/1000th of a second or something, because that guy is running really fast, like world class fast. And then you want to freeze his entire body, including his legs, his arms, whatever is in motion, right? So if this guy is running like this, you want to freeze the arms in a particular position, right? That will come with a high shutter speed. So that is the application of using something at a TV mode, which is the shutter speed. Now let's go to the next mode in the camera, which is going to be the aperture priority mode, so which is the AV mode, right? And I will show you what we do with that AV mode. Okay, again, can you see the camera and you can see the scene, right? Okay, so right now it has an AV of 9, so it's a aperture of 9. So I'm going to make that aperture to the lowest possible, which is, I'm sorry, the biggest aperture possible, which is 2.8. So the numbers are the lowest, which means that the lens opening is the largest, right? So in this case, this lens supports an aperture of 2.8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the focus on the tripod again. So I will say you focus on the tripod, and now you see that the picture, that the exposure that it is choosing is 2.8, which is fixed by me, right? And it has chosen a shutter speed of 1/30th of a second, and it has chosen an ISO 400, right? So now let's take a picture. Right now you can see that the tripod is perfectly in focus and all the things in the background are out of focus. Now what do I do? I mean, if I really want, let's say it's a group picture, right? So there are people standing in multiple levels, right? So you have, a stack of, like, say, for 3 or 4 rows of people, and you want to get them all. What you need is not a low, an aperture that is high, like 2.8, but you want the depth of field to be higher so that you capture everybody that is there, right? So now let us go and increase that depth of field, right? So now I will go to the other extreme, right? So I will go to, and this one can go up to 22. So I will go up to 22, right? Now I will again focus on the tripod. Okay, now that is the experiment. The experiment is that I am focusing on something here, right? It is, the tripod is showing the red rectangle. Now I will take a picture. It is f22, which means it's a small aperture, which means it's a large depth of field. Now you see that things in the background are also decently in focus. It is not as blurred as before. Now there's a handshake, and that is why you see that the picture, the picture is blurred, but that is because of the handshake rather than that the picture. Let me try to stabilize the camera a little bit and then take a picture. See, these SLRs usually need 2 hands, and I am using one hand to do things in the camera, in the laptop, and using this. So now this is better. Okay, so now you can see that, right? The picture in the back is also in focus, and then the tripod is also in focus. So whereas let me go back to the 2.8 version. So I'm again going back and increasing the aperture to 2.8, which means that I want to separate the tripod from the noise in the background. So let's say this is the guy that I want to focus, and all these other people are somebody that I don't care about, then I want to focus only on the tripod, right? And the other guys should be blurred, right? So that is what I'm going to do now. I will go to the shutter button. Now you see that the picture is blurred and the tripod is in perfect focus. Now that is the aperture priority. So the aperture priority is something where you are able to separate, give definition to people in the frame. Right now, I'll stop or I'll go to the presentation. So aperture priority is when you want to have a blurred background. You want to ensure that people that are in the background is just noise. You want to get rid of them from the picture, and you want to make sure that this something is that is in the front is in the focus. So there is an example of a fairly high aperture 5.6, and then everything in the background is completely out of focus. Now in this particular camera, there was an aperture of 32, which is extremely high. It's usually possible in telephoto lenses, and most of the other lenses they go up to 22, right? So he's gone to 32, and then you'll see that everything is in focus. The cards behind, as well as the king, is in focus, right? So that is the three things that we have seen where you can actually go from overriding what the camera can do, right? So we started with the program mode. So I'll just summarize what we've seen so far. We started with the program mode. The program mode allows you to control things like ISO, the focus point, and allows you to compensate exposure. It allows you to do the white balance and the metering as well. But I tend not to use those functions as much. The second thing is that we went to the shutter priority mode. The shutter priority mode, when you choose a particular shutter speed, right, it allows you to either freeze motion. So that is like you saw that the ceiling fan, you can see the blades clearly, or it allows you to ensure that the motion is kind of like blurred, right? So that you can't actually see what is happening. So by going to a low shutter speed, and the picture that I got of the fan was that the blades were like just whirring, and you could feel the motion, but you couldn't see the blades, right? So one can do creative effects of that as well. The third thing that we saw was aperture priority. Aperture priority means that I'm able to give separation to the subjects, right? So of that I see in the screen. So for example, there was a tripod, and then there was a picture in the background. And by using a high aperture, a large aperture, which means a low aperture value, like a 2.8, and focusing on the tripod, I was able to get the tripod clear, and then everything else in the background kind of faded away, right? And if I used a very high aperture, which is a high aperture value like 22 that I used, that means that in the lens it is a small hole that the light is being passed through. The depth of field increases, and therefore both the tripod and the picture comes out to be in good focus, right? So that is the idea behind these three modes, and it allows you to customize pictures in the times that the camera hasn't decided the best, right? So for example, let's say you are photographing a dance concert, or you're photographing, let's say, sports, cricket or something, or you're photographing, like, let's say, an F1 race or whatever it is, right? You know that things are happening quickly, right? So automatically you would start it in TV mode, because you don't want the camera to be always thinking like, what is the shutter speed that I should use? Is this good or not? You don't want the camera to be thinking. You know that I want a fast shutter speed to freeze action. So you go to TV mode, you set the shutter speed to be like 1 over 500th of a second, or let's say you're photographing birds in flight, right? No, if they're birds in flight, you would even go to a higher shutter speed, like 1 over 2000th of a second or something like that, right? Or even higher. And what happens if I go to a higher shutter speed? If I, let's say, go to a higher shutter speed of 1 over 2000th of a second, you know that the camera is going to open the shutter and close it just like that, right? If you do that, that means the amount of light that is coming into the camera is going to be low, right? Because it is doing it very fast, which means that the conditions outside have to be bright, right? So if you want to go for a really high shutter speed, like 1 over 2000th of a second, and you try it in really dim light, like in early morning or something, the camera might struggle to actually produce the right exposure. So if it is daylight, everything is good, it's nicely sunny and all that, a high shutter speed can actually give you the results that you want. Now, if you go to a low shutter speed, on the other hand, it allows you to focus, expose things in low light. So, let's say things are dark and, it's early morning or, late evening and things are dark. The camera needs more time. It needs more light. And therefore increase the shutter speed so that the shutter is open for a longer period of time, and you allow the camera to gather as much light and therefore produce the correct exposure. The aperture priority is usually used to give separation in the subject. So typically, I use it to ensure that if I want to ensure, I want to isolate. For example, let's say I'm focusing, taking pictures of my daughter dancing, and daughter is dancing in a group, right? So there are other people also dancing. I don't want to, let's say that I don't want to take pictures of them, and I want to focus. I want my daughter to be the spotlight of these pictures. Then I go for a large aperture, a small aperture value, so like 2.8 or 4.0 or something like that, so that the other dancers are not as clear or it is kind of blurred. Just like Zoom is right now focusing on me and blurring everything else in the background. So this is kind of like it is using something like a 2.8 or a 1.8 or something, where it is making me the focus and everything else is blurred. This is being done through computational photography, but the same kind of a thing can be done through lenses, right? So that is the three different creative modes that we have seen: the program mode, the shutter priority mode, and the aperture mode. And these are the usual reasons that you would use these kind of modes. So with that, I will stop and ask if there are any questions. Questions, guys?
Sridhar, just a question. I believe even on the iPhone we have manual settings, right? Is it possible to?
Okay, why don't I take a couple of minutes and show you how can I do manual stuff on the iPhone? Give me just a minute. Great question. I will try to do that. Okay, so you can see there is an app called Project Indigo, right? And I'm using that right now. And you can see the screen of the iPhone, right? And what I can do is if I go into something called the Pro mode, now all these other controls are open to me, right? So I can choose the focus, right? So I can choose where the focus is going to be. Like right now, the focus is at 0.79. I can say, no, I don't want that to be the focus. I want something, further away to be the focus, right? So you can see that the laptop has gone out of focus and, possibly, let's say that book has come a little bit more in focus. Now, if I go and remove that and make it auto, then the book has come back into focus, right? So now coming back, it says that the iPhone or the laptop is at 0.56 meters, right? So it is focusing there. And if I go to the book, it is at zero point 0.7 meters, right? So this is the way it is auto focusing, and I can actually change the focus to something that I want. So right? So instead of the 0.56, I will go to 0.75. And then you can see that the laptop has gone slightly out of focus and the book is in focus. So this is the focus. I can also do things like the shutter speed, right? So now you can see that I have right now, it is choosing auto shutter speed of 1 over 125th of a second. I will say that I want a really low shutter speed of 1 over 8th. Now you can see that there are a lot of these red things that are happening. Now, red things are happening because it is saying that all those things are overexposed and you can't see details in those particular areas. So it is too white, right? So the camera is not able to expose properly. It is telling you if that is the subject that you want, this is not a good shutter speed. You need to reduce it, right? So now I go back down. So 1 over 50th of a second. Now those bright things that you see in the center are actually correctly exposed. You can still see there are a couple of red floating things that means that those things are slightly overexposed. I can also, so that was shutter speed. I can also increase the ISO, right? So I'll go back to auto shutter speed. Now I will increase the ISO. Now you see that I've increased the ISO to 10,000, right? Which is, it has gone to a shutter speed of 1 over 12,800th of a second. You can say, can you see it at the top, right? Which means that it is trying to do something really that the phone camera is probably not great at, which is to have a shutter speed that high, right? And because the ISO is this high, right? The ISO is 12,500. It needs to take a picture really fast in order to get a good exposure. Now, if I go down, so by making the ISO kind of like 64, you can see that the shutter speed has gone down to like 1/50th of a second. If I make that ISO auto, which is ISO 100, now it has gone to its sweet spot of ISO 1 over 125th of a second. So that is shutter speed and ISO that can be controlled. You can also do exposure compensation, right? So right now it is 0 exposure compensation. I can increase the exposure compensation. What did I say? If I increase exposure compensation, everything becomes brighter. Now you can see that it has made all the white things on the screen really bright, and therefore I can't see any details there. I can also decrease the exposure, so to -3, and then you can see that everything has become dark, right? This is the result of the exposure compensation, and I can go back to the normal, which is 0, right? I can also do white balance in this particular case, right? I can reduce the temperature, which means that it will become a little warmer, right? So in this case, everything becomes bluish, and in this case, everything becomes really yellowish, right? So this is a very warm, white balance, and it is giving you that everything is white. it also has these presets, right? So the cloudy is 6600, the sunny is 5250, the incandescent light is 4200, the tungsten light is 3200, and so on. But if I still choose auto, it says that the exposure that I have for the light that is there right now, the correct exposure is 4500, 4600. So this is a way to do it in the in the phone. This is something called Project Indigo, and it allows you to. And then of course you can take pictures. I can also take zoom, zoom out and zoom in. Like I can do this, right? So zoom in, zoom in even further, right? And zoom in even further and so on, right? So that I can do. If I go to night mode, it's as it is suggesting, is it able to focus on something there? I guess not, right? So it needs a little bit more distance in this particular camera. So if I go back to Pro mode, I will be able to do focus on the exact distance. So right now, 0.75, you know that 0.75 are those books, right? So those books are more in focus. The camera screen is at 0.5, and I need to make it auto, and then it will be able to focus on 0.7, 0.5. Oh, it's in 4x mode. Okay. So this is why. So when I go to focus, it is showing you that the focus is around 0.5 meters. Okay. So I'll stop the sharing of this and see if you guys have any questions, any more questions.
Thanks, Sridhar.
Okay, this is that Project Indigo is available only for iOS at the moment. I'm sure there are similar apps on the Android area where you can do these kind of things, but this Project Indigo, yeah, I can highly recommend because it literally allows you to tweak everything that you can with a digital camera. You are able to do it on the iPhone as well. Okay, any other questions? If there are no other questions, I want to thank you all for coming and moving beyond auto like we want you to do, right? So we want you to explore the capabilities of your camera. We want you to understand through the series of these presentations. We want you to understand why the camera is doing what it does, so that when you understand how to control these kind of things, these settings, you will take the best picture that you want, right? So you will know, I want this, right? Because your eyes are actually the best camera, right? So these other lenses and all that, these big heavy lenses, they only approach what your eye can see and what your brain is processing as to like, what is the picture that I want? Now, the cameras are getting better, right? So they are actually the focus is beautiful right now in new cameras. The exposure compensation, the ISO capability, the dynamic range is all very high. Therefore, you get really good pictures, but sometimes you might need to overlay. So, like I said, like I'm photographing my daughter's dance. I need a really high shutter speed in order to freeze motion so that, I don't want to see her leg blurred, or, when she's like twirling like this, I don't want these ornaments like these, necklaces that she's wearing. I don't want them to be blurred and so on. So I need a high shutter speed in order to freeze that motion so that when I capture that image, it is capturing a particular, moment in time. Now, there are, like, see, the dancer, she's not like, so putting one pose and waiting for me to take a picture. She's continuously moving, right? So sometimes with these kind of cameras, you are, clicking, and sometimes her eye will be closed, or sometimes her eye will be like kind of partly open, That is why nowadays, these cameras can take really fast bursts of pictures, so that when you keep that thing, pressed, it will take like, my other camera can take 12 pictures per second in mechanical shutter mode, and in electronic shutter mode it can take 30 pictures per second. So 30 pictures per second, I guarantee that you will get a nice expression of all those 30 pictures. You will, her eye will be open, her hands will be in a good pose and all that kind of stuff. But it will end up, you'll end up having to process all these pictures. You have to look at which one is the right one and then possibly delete the others. Right. So, but these cameras have these capabilities now that you can end up taking great pictures. Thank you all for attending, and see you all in 2 weeks. Praveen's got a very exciting session. He's going to be talking about, again, for those who didn't listen at the front, he's going to be talking about advanced techniques that you can do with digital cameras, including time lapse photography. You can. He's also going to be talking about focus stacking, where you can actually get a lot of things in focus, especially of things that are very close to you. So, like macro photography, you will need techniques like focus stacking. He will talk about multiple exposures. He will talk about the manual mode in the camera. He will talk about bulb, and he will talk about applications as to where you would use these kind of things. So looking forward to advanced techniques 2 weeks from now, and 2 weeks from then. Sam will end these series of sessions by talking about creative aspects of pictures, as to, like, what are you expect, how do you compose a picture, why would you want a particular way to look at a picture, what are you expecting to see from a picture, what story does that picture need to tell you, right? So those are creative aspects of pictures going to be covered by Sam 4 weeks from now. 2 weeks from now, Praveen. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir, for the one insightful session, and I thank everyone for joining us today. We look forward to your continued support and participation in future sessions. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.